The weight of every gaze pressed against Aurora Blackthorn's shoulders as security escorted her from the premium cabin. Whispers trailed behind her like smoke, accompanied by barely concealed smirks from passengers who had already judged her unworthy. Her facial reconstructions made them uncomfortable, so she had to be relocated. The mathematics were that simple. The humiliation burned deeper than the original trauma ever had. Then the cockpit door opened with a soft pneumatic hiss. The captain emerged, his eyes methodically scanning faces until they found hers. His expression transformed instantly, recognition, shock, and something approaching reverence. The entire cabin fell into cathedral silence. From which corner of the world are you experiencing this story? If it resonates with your soul, please consider joining our community. We share tales of unsung heroes every week. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the windows of Transcontinental Flight 447. Dr. Aurora Blackthorn adjusted herself into Seat 1C, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the high collar of her charcoal blazer to better conceal the intricate web of surgical scars that traced her neck like a topographical map of survival. Through the porthole, she observed ground crew moving with choreographed precision, each person understanding their role in the complex ballad of aviation. Soft jazz drifted through the cabin speakers, creating an atmosphere of understated luxury as premium passengers began boarding. Aurora inhaled deeply, permitting herself a moment of tranquility. 4 years had passed since her last commercial flight. 4 years of medical reconstruction, intensive rehabilitation, and psychological counseling. This journey represented something profound, a return to normalcy, or at least her redefined version of it. Champagne before departure, Dr. Flight attendant Iris Beaumont offered with genuine warmth, her professional smile unwavering as she registered Aurora's appearance. "Just water, please," Aurora replied softly, her voice carrying quiet authority beneath its gentleness. She never consumed alcohol before flights, a discipline from her military years. "Stay alert. Stay prepared even during downtime." Iris nodded professionally. "Of course, I'll bring that immediately." The serene pre-boarding atmosphere shattered as Knox Montgomery and Scarlett Fairmont made their entrance. Scarlett's diamond tennis bracelet caught the sunlight as she stopped abruptly in the aisle, her companion colliding with her Louis Vuitton carry-on. "Darling, what's the—" Knox began, then followed his wife's horrified stare to Aurora. His expression shifted from irritation to disgust. "Ah, I understand." The murmurs began immediately, discreet initially, then growing bolder as more premium passengers boarded. Aurora maintained her gaze fixed on the tarmac outside, her reflection in the window revealing more of her reconstructed features. A testament to trauma that extended far below her collar line. "Excuse me." Scarlett's voice carried as she flagged down Iris. "A word, please." Aurora didn't need to turn to comprehend what was happening. She'd experienced it in restaurants, at medical conferences, even in hospital waiting rooms. Her fingers moved to the worn leather notebook in her lap, tracing the embossed words, "Operation Crimson Dawn." For a moment, memories flashed, blinding explosions, screams, her hands steady amid absolute chaos. A young boy across the aisle stared openly at Aurora's scars until his father nudged him and whispered something that made the child's eyes widen with fear. The boy quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by his tablet screen. Aurora had witnessed that reaction countless times, the mixture of fear and pity, as if her scars were contagious or somehow reflected personal failure. Her watch, a military-grade timepiece with specialized markings, showed 8:15 a.m. Still 18 minutes until scheduled departure. She absently touched the watch face, a habit formed during years of operations where timing meant everything. Minutes later, Senior Flight Attendant Violet Kingsley approached, corporate smile firmly in place. "Dr. Blackthorn, we have a situation with our seating arrangement. I'm afraid we'll need to relocate you." No explanation offered, none required. "Of course," Aurora replied, gathering her minimal belongings. She recognized the rehearsed empathy in Violet's eyes, the look of someone following orders while privately questioning them. As she stood, Knox Montgomery whispered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Some people simply don't belong in certain spaces." His wife touched his arm in mock admonishment, but her smirk betrayed her agreement. Several passengers had the decency to appear uncomfortable, yet none spoke up. The walk of shame commenced, escorted by Violet. Aurora moved down the aisle as curious eyes tracked her progress. A businessman pulled his jacket closer as she passed, as though proximity might somehow contaminate his expensive suit. A mother tugged her child protectively to her side, wary and defensive. A college student whispered too loudly to his friend, "Must have been in some horrific accident. Should really cover that up." With each step, Aurora's posture remained impeccable, her chin level, her pace unhurried. She'd endured far worse than this minor humiliation. Through the partially opened cockpit door, she glimpsed Captain Remington Vale reviewing flight plans, his profile sharp against the instrument panels. For a moment, her steps faltered. Something about his jawline, the way he carried himself, a fleeting sense of recognition that vanished as quickly as it had come. The passengers in economy seemed less concerned with her appearance, perhaps because they had their own discomforts to worry about. A few glanced up as she passed, then returned to their books or devices. A military serviceman in uniform observed her longer than the others, squinting slightly as if trying to place her face. Her new seat was in the final row beside the lavatory. As she settled in, she placed her notebook in the seat pocket, its title partially visible, Advanced Trauma Protocols for Aviation Emergencies. The irony wasn't lost on her, being seated as far from premium class as possible while literally having authored the manual on keeping passengers safe. Nearby, a newspaper lay abandoned on a seat, its headline partially visible, 7-year anniversary of Damascus siege approaches. Aurora looked away, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry about that," whispered Nova Blackwood, a young flight attendant who offered her water. "It's not right. Some scars are easier to see than others," Aurora replied, her gaze drifting to the gathering storm clouds outside. "Don't worry about me." She opened a small metal case and took out medication with slightly trembling hands. Through the thin cabin walls, she could hear flight attendants discussing her situation. "The Montgomerys are major shareholders. What would you have done?" "Still doesn't make it right. She paid for that seat like everyone else." "Did you see how the captain looked when he saw her on the manifest?" "I've never seen Remington react like that." This last comment caught Aurora's attention. She frowned slightly, trying to recall if she knew any pilot named Remington. The military was vast, and during her tenure as chief surgical officer, she had treated hundreds, perhaps thousands of personnel. Aurora swallowed her pill dry and closed her eyes. The subtle vibration of the engines powering up resonated through her reconstructed body. The familiar rumble was almost comforting, reminiscent of medical evacuation helicopters and transport planes. As the safety demonstration began, Aurora could feel the military serviceman still watching her. His gaze wasn't judgmental like the others, but curious, perhaps even respectful. He sat 6 rows ahead, occasionally glancing back as if trying to confirm something. The plane began to taxi, moving with deliberate precision toward the runway. Aurora allowed herself to relax marginally, the medication beginning to ease the chronic pain in her right side. Pain management remained a daily battle even years after the incident. Her doctors had warned her that flying might exacerbate her condition due to pressure changes, but she had insisted on taking this flight. Some journeys were necessary regardless of the cost. Through her window, the gathering storm clouds looked ominous against the morning sky. Weather reports had mentioned possible turbulence over the Pacific. Aurora found herself automatically running through emergency protocols in her mind, an old habit from her days training flight crews on crisis response. The plane accelerated down the runway, pressing Aurora back into her seat. The familiar sensation of takeoff, that moment of suspension between earth and sky, always reminded her of the thin line between life and death, how quickly circumstances could change, how one moment could alter the trajectory of countless lives. As the aircraft climbed through cloud cover, Aurora caught a glimpse of the Montgomerys settled comfortably in their premium seats, champagne flutes in hand, seemingly celebrating their small victory. She wondered briefly what they would think if they knew who she really was, what she had done, what she had survived. But that was precisely the problem with scars. People saw only the damage, never the strength it took to endure it. The cabin pressurized as Flight 447 continued its ascent. Light turbulence jostled passengers while Aurora remained still, eyes closed, seemingly undisturbed by the aircraft's movements. Years of operating in crisis zones had taught her to find calm amid chaos, to steady her hands when everything around her shook. She thought of the cockpit, of Captain Vale. Something about him nagged at her memory, but she couldn't place him. During the height of the conflict, she had treated so many wounded personnel that faces often blurred together. Only the most severe cases remained distinct in her mind, the ones she had fought hardest to save, or the ones she had lost despite her best efforts. "Excuse me." A tentative voice interrupted her thoughts. Nova had returned, holding a complimentary blanket. "I thought you might want this. It gets cold back here." Aurora opened her eyes and offered a small smile. "Thank you, that's very kind. I read your paper," Nova said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "In my paramedic training, about Tredge during the Damascus siege. It changed how we think about mass casualty events." Aurora's expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened with interest. "You're studying medicine, emergency medicine." "Part-time while I work this job." Nova hesitated, then added, "What you did there, running back in all those times. I just wanted you to know that some of us recognize real courage when we see it." Before Aurora could respond, the intercom crackled to life, and the young flight attendant hurried back to her station for the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the captain's voice, steady and authoritative. "This is Captain Remington Vale speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet and have clear skies ahead after this patch of turbulence." Aurora froze at the sound of his full name. Remington Vale? The memory crystallized instantly. A young lieutenant with severe burns covering 38% of his body, trapped in the collapsed wing of the medical facility. The man she had gone back for on her final rescue attempt, when everyone else had said it was too dangerous, that the structure would collapse entirely at any moment. The man she had carried out on her back just before the building gave way, leaving her trapped instead. The plane shuddered slightly, contradicting the captain's assessment of clear skies ahead. Aurora gripped the armrest, not from fear, but from the shock of recognition. Remington Vale. The name echoed in her mind alongside fragmented memories of fire and collapsing walls. She recalled his unconscious form, how impossibly heavy he had felt as she dragged him through smoke-filled corridors, her own lungs burning, skin blistering from the heat. "Our flight time to Los Angeles will be approximately 6 hours. The captain's voice continued. "Before we continue, I'd like to step out and greet you all personally, as is Transcontinental Airways tradition on our international routes." Aurora felt her heart rate accelerate. She hadn't seen Vale since that day. After the building collapsed, she had spent months in a military hospital, followed by years of reconstructive surgery. By the time she had recovered enough to return to partial duty, many of those she had saved had been reassigned or discharged. The cockpit door opened and Captain Vale emerged in his crisp uniform. Tall and commanding, he moved with the confidence of someone who had cheated death and knew it. The left side of his neck bore the faint traces of burned scars, skillfully treated and nearly invisible unless one knew exactly what to look for. He began the usual pleasantries, moving slowly down the aisle, nodding and greeting passengers with practiced charm. Premium passengers received his particular attention, the Montgomerys especially seeming delighted by his professional courtesy. "We're honored to have you aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery," Aurora heard him say. "Transcontinental Airways values your continued loyalty." The military serviceman who had been watching Aurora now sat up straighter, his attention divided between her and the approaching captain. He seemed to be connecting the same dots Aurora had just pieced together. Remington continued his slow progress through the cabin. His eyes swept methodically across each section, acknowledging passengers with a nod or brief greeting. When his gaze reached the back of the aircraft, he found Aurora. Mid-sentence, his speech faltered. The change in his demeanor was immediate and profound. Recognition, disbelief, then something deeper washing over his features. For a moment, he stood frozen in the aisle, one hand gripping the headrest of a nearby seat to steady himself. He straightened his posture, voice shifting from cordial to reverent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have the extraordinary honor of flying with someone very special today." The cabin fell silent. Even the crying infant 3 rows up seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. 7 years ago in Damascus, our military base was attacked. The medical wing was hit first. His voice carried through the silent cabin. One surgeon ran back into the burning building 19 times. Aurora's eyes opened, fixing on Remington with quiet intensity. She hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted it. Recognition was never what drove her. Not in Damascus, not in any of her deployments. She saved 53 lives that day, including mine. His voice cracked slightly. The protocols she developed while treating victims under fire are now standard training for every commercial pilot and flight attendant worldwide. The military serviceman, who had been watching Aurora, now stood, recognition dawning on his face. "Sir," he called out, his voice strong with emotion. "Sergeant Phoenix Hawthorne, sir, 3rd Battalion. Dr. Blackthorne saved my squad leader in Damascus." Whispers erupted throughout the cabin as passengers turned to look at Aurora with new eyes. The atmosphere had transformed completely. The very people who had studiously avoided looking at her scars now couldn't tear their gaze away. "The person who taught me how to handle any emergency at 37,000 feet, Remington continued, his eyes never leaving Aurora, "is sitting in the back row of our aircraft." All eyes turned to Aurora, who remained perfectly still, her scarred hands folded in her lap. She had never sought recognition for what happened in Damascus. In fact, she had actively avoided it, turning down medals and commendations, requesting reassignment to research positions away from the public eye. Her scars were enough of a reminder of that day. She didn't need the constant retelling of the story to accompany them. Remington began walking purposefully down the aisle toward her, other crew members following in his wake. Passengers leaned into the aisle to watch, some even standing to get a better view. When he reached her row, he stood at attention and offered a formal military salute. "Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Aurora Blackthorne, Phoenix of Damascus, I never got to thank you properly." Sergeant Hawthorne and 3 other passengers with military backgrounds rose from their seats and saluted. The cabin remained in stunned silence. From her peripheral vision, Aurora could see the Montgomerys' faces frozen in horror, the full weight of their earlier behavior now crashing down upon them. Violet's hand covered her mouth in shock, her eyes wide with the realization of what she had participated in. Remington extended his hand toward Aurora. "Your seat in the cockpit is waiting, Doctor, where you've always belonged." Aurora hesitated, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. For years, she had lived with people seeing only her scars, defining her by her disfigurement. Now, in the span of moments, these same people were redefining her by heroism. Neither felt quite right. Neither encompassed the full truth of who she was. Still, she recognized the gesture for what it was, not just an acknowledgement of past heroism, but a restoration of dignity in the present moment. With characteristic grace, she accepted his outstretched hand and rose from her seat. The young flight attendant, Nova, stepped forward, holding Aurora's notebook. "I knew it was you," she whispered, her expression a mixture of awe and vindication. "From the moment I saw your name on the passenger manifest." Aurora took the notebook, her expression softening slightly. Sometimes recognition comes when we least expect it. As they made their way forward, the atmosphere in the cabin had transformed completely. Passengers who had previously stared with disgust or averted their eyes now looked on with respect, even admiration. Some appeared ashamed, others simply stunned. Sergeant Hawthorne stepped into the aisle as they passed. "My squad leader still talks about you, ma'am. Says you kept working even after the 3rd explosion, with shrapnel in your own shoulder." Aurora nodded, acknowledging his words without elaborating. The memories of that day were still too vivid, too painful to recount casually. When they reached the premium section, the Montgomerys stood awkwardly, their earlier confidence replaced by palpable discomfort. "Dr. Blackthorne," Scarlett began, her voice tight with embarrassment. "We had absolutely no idea who you were." Aurora paused, studying the woman who had been so instrumental in her humiliation. "Would it have mattered?" she asked quietly. "If I had been anyone else, someone without medals or recognition. Would my scars have been more acceptable then? The question hung in the air, unanswered and uncomfortable. Knox Montgomery cleared his throat. We would, of course, be honored if you'd return to your original seat. Remington stepped forward before Aurora could respond. I believe Dr. Blackthorne will be joining me in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight, he said firmly. Transcontinental Airways values her expertise far too much to have her seated anywhere else. The deliberate echo of his earlier words to the Montgomerys wasn't lost on anyone in the cabin. Several passengers nodded in approval, while others looked away, perhaps confronting their own complicity in Aurora's treatment. As they continued toward the cockpit, a young mother stood, holding her sleeping child. Dr. Blackthorne, she said softly. My husband was there. He said you continued operating even when the generators failed, using cell phone lights to see. He said you never once showed fear. Aurora smiled slightly. Fear doesn't help in those situations. We all did what was necessary. An elderly gentleman reached out as they passed, touching her arm gently. My granddaughter is studying medicine because of you. The Damascus protocols are part of her curriculum. The acknowledgments continued as they moved forward. Small gestures of respect, whispered thanks. Eyes that now saw beyond the scars to the woman who had earned them through extraordinary courage. When they reached the cockpit door, Remington turned to address the cabin once more. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Blackthorne will be joining me in the cockpit for our journey. Her expertise has quite literally written the book on aviation emergency response. Spontaneous applause broke out, starting in economy and spreading throughout the cabin. The sound swelled, filling the aircraft with a vibration very different from the engine's steady rumble. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot, First Officer Asher Kingsley, stood respectfully. It's an honor, Colonel Blackthorne. Your work saved my brother at Ramstein Air Base 4 years ago. Aurora nodded, taking in the advanced cockpit with professional interest. The new Boeing system, she observed. I've read about the updated emergency protocols, which you helped design, Remington said, closing the door behind them. He gestured to the jump seat. Please. As she settled in, Aurora noticed the storm clouds ahead had grown darker and more imposing. The aircraft warning light flickered momentarily, a brief amber warning that disappeared almost as soon as it appeared. Odd. Remington murmured, checking the instrument panel. We've had some electrical inconsistencies since takeoff. Nothing major but worth monitoring. Aurora leaned forward, her medical training giving way to the aviation safety expertise she had developed after Damascus. How long has it been happening? Started during pre-flight checks. Maintenance cleared us. Said it was probably just a sensor issue. He glanced at her. You look skeptical. In my experience, there's no such thing as just a sensor issue at 37,000 feet. She studied the panel carefully. Mind if I take a look at the electrical readouts? Remington gestured to the diagnostic screen. Be my guest. Having the author of our emergency protocols here during a potential issue seems like extraordinarily good luck or extraordinarily bad luck, depending on one's perspective, Aurora replied quietly. Aurora studied the electrical system diagnostics with practiced precision, her scarred fingers moving across the screen with surprising dexterity. Years of reconstructive surgery had restored much of her fine motor control, though the tightness of the scar tissue still limited her range of motion on particularly cold days. The power fluctuations are minimal but consistent, she observed, occurring approximately every 3 minutes, primarily affecting the secondary systems. Remington nodded, impressed by her immediate grasp of the situation. Exactly what I noticed. Not enough to trigger automated warnings, but definitely unusual. First Officer Kingsley adjusted their course slightly to avoid the building's storm front. Weather radar shows significant turbulence ahead. If we maintain current altitude, we'll hit the worst of it in approximately 15 minutes. Can we go around? Aurora asked, her eyes still on the diagnostic screen. Not without adding almost 90 minutes to our flight time, Remington replied. We could climb above it, but with these electrical inconsistencies, I'd prefer to maintain our current altitude. Less stress on the pressurization systems. Aurora nodded in agreement. Prudent decision. The Pacific in winter isn't forgiving of mechanical failures. A comfortable silence fell between them as they worked, each respecting the other's expertise. It struck Aurora how natural this felt, being back in an operational environment where decisions had clear consequences and problems had definable parameters. "I never got to thank you," Remington said quietly, his voice pitched so only she could hear, "for Damascus. For coming back for me when everyone said the building was going to collapse." Aurora kept her eyes on the instruments. "You don't need to thank me for doing my job." "Your job wasn't to risk your life 19 times?" he countered. "Your job wasn't to go back in when the structural engineers were shouting that the walls were about to come down. Your job wasn't to carry me out on your back when you already had shrapnel wounds and second-degree burns." She finally looked at him, her expression softening slightly. "What happened to you after?" "I lost track during my recovery. 10 months of reconstructive surgery and rehabilitation. They wanted to discharge me on medical, but I fought it. Transferred to aviation. Used what I learned from you to rewrite pilot training for emergency scenarios." He gestured at the cockpit around them. "And here we are." The aircraft shuddered as they encountered the first edges of turbulence. Remington and Kingsley responded automatically, adjusting controls with practiced efficiency. "Passengers are secured," came Violet's voice over the intercom. "All service items stowed." "Thank you, cabin crew," Remington responded. Then to Aurora, "I should address the passengers. People get nervous in turbulence." As he reached for the intercom, the amber warning light flashed again, this time staying illuminated. Simultaneously, several systems on the main panel flickered, power fluctuation lasting 1.2 seconds. Kingsley reported, his voice calm but tense, longer than previous instances. Before anyone could respond, the main cabin lights dimmed momentarily. The auxiliary power indicator showed a brief surge, then stabilized. "That's not a sensor issue," Aurora said, frowning. "That's a power management problem." Remington nodded, his expression grim. "Agreed." "Kingsley, run a full diagnostic on the electrical bus. I'll notify ATC that we may need to divert." As Kingsley began the diagnostic sequence, Remington turned to Aurora. "Dr. Blackthorne, I'd like your assessment. In your expert opinion, should we continue or divert to Hawaii?" The question wasn't merely professional courtesy. It was an acknowledgement of her expertise, a restoration of the authority that had been so publicly stripped from her during boarding. Aurora considered the situation carefully, weighing the risks with the same clinical detachment she had used in triage situations. The fluctuations are increasing in duration, but not in severity. If they remain isolated to non-critical systems, continuing to Los Angeles is acceptable. However, I would recommend descending to 33,000 feet as a precaution. Lower altitude means less stress on the pressurization system if we lose partial electrical function. Remington nodded, already reaching for the controls. "Kingsley, prepare for descent to 33,000 feet. Notify ATC." As they began their controlled descent, the aircraft encountered stronger turbulence. Through the cockpit window, Aurora could see the massive wall of storm clouds ahead, dark and imposing. Yet beyond them, sunlight broke through the upper atmosphere, golden and inviting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Remington announced over the intercom, his voice steady and reassuring. "This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some turbulence and will be descending to 33,000 feet to provide a smoother ride. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened." He paused, then added, "I want to assure you that we have the situation well in hand. In fact, we are particularly fortunate today to have Dr. Aurora Blackthorne assisting in the cockpit. Many of you now know her as the Phoenix of Damascus. But what you might not realize is that she also authored the emergency protocols used by every major airline. You couldn't be in better hands." The intercom clicked off and Remington turned to find Aurora, giving him a mildly exasperated look. "That wasn't necessary," she said quietly.
"Yes."
"It was," he replied. "After how they treated you, they should know exactly who's helping keep them safe right now." Kingsley interrupted their exchange. "Diagnostic complete. We have a fault in the secondary power distribution panel. It's causing the system to cycle between primary and backup power sources." Aurora leaned forward, studying the readouts. "Can we isolate the affected circuit?" "Not from here," Kingsley replied. Would need to access the electrical bay beneath the cabin floor. Remington frowned. That requires taking up floor panels in the galley. Disruptive but doable. Another power fluctuation hit, longer than before. This time, several primary systems flickered momentarily before stabilizing. Decision time, Remington said, looking at Aurora. We can continue with increasing electrical instability or attempt repairs mid-flight. Attempt repairs. Aurora replied without hesitation. I'll assist. I'm familiar with the system architecture. Remington raised an eyebrow. You've studied aircraft electrical systems too. After Damascus, during my recovery, I had time on my hands and needed something to focus on besides the pain. She shrugged slightly. Aircraft emergency systems seemed relevant to my interests. He nodded, understanding. Kingsley, take the controls. Blackthorn and I will access the electrical bay. In the main cabin, passengers watched with concern as Remington and Aurora emerged from the cockpit. The earlier admiration for Aurora had transformed into something more profound as word spread about the electrical issues. Is everything all right? Scarlett Montgomery asked, her earlier haughtiness replaced by genuine anxiety. Remington addressed the cabin. We're experiencing some minor electrical inconsistencies. Doctor, Blackthorn and I are going to take a look at the system. There's nothing to be concerned about. Nova approached with a small toolkit. The access panel is ready, Captain. In the galley, crew members had already removed the necessary floor panels, revealing the aircraft's complex internal systems. Remington and Aurora knelt beside the opening, examining the electrical distribution panel beneath. There, Aurora pointed, identifying a connection that showed signs of heat stress. That relay is cycling improperly. Remington nodded. Good eye. We can bypass it and reroute through the tertiary system. They worked together with extraordinary efficiency, their movements complementing each other as if they had been partners for years rather than reunited minutes ago. Aurora's medical training gave her exceptional fine motor control, while Remington's pilot experience provided crucial system knowledge. In the cabin, passengers watched this unexpected drama unfold. The Montgomerys in particular seemed transfixed by Aurora's confident expertise, her scars now secondary to the skill and composure she displayed. I've never seen anything like this, Knox Montgomery murmured to another premium passenger. They're actually fixing the plane mid-air. A young mother from economy who had moved forward to watch nodded. That's the Phoenix of Damascus for you. My husband says she performed surgery during a firefight once, never even flinched when bullets hit the medical tent. As Remington and Aurora completed the bypass, the lights throughout the cabin stabilized, and a subtle change in the background hum indicated the electrical system had normalized. A spontaneous round of applause broke out among the passengers. Remington stood, offering his hand to help Aurora up. Nice work, doctor. I think we just became the first pilot-surgeon team to perform electrical surgery at 37,000 feet. Aurora accepted his hand with a small smile. Technically, we're at 32,847 feet, but close enough. As they made their way back toward the cockpit, passengers reached out to touch Aurora's arm or shoulder in gratitude. The very people who had recoiled from her scars hours earlier now sought connection with her, seeing beyond her appearance to the extraordinary person beneath. When they reached the premium section, the Montgomerys stood awkwardly in the aisle. Dr. Blackthorn. Knox began, his earlier condescension completely gone. We owe you an apology. Our behavior was inexcusable. Aurora regarded them thoughtfully. Mr. Montgomery, I don't need your apology. What I hope is that you'll remember this moment the next time you encounter someone who looks different. The scars you can see are just evidence of survival. It's the invisible ones that define us. Scarlett Montgomery's eyes filled with tears. I never thought about it that way. I'm truly sorry. Be sorry, then be better. Aurora replied simply, continuing toward the cockpit. Inside, Kingsley reported that all systems had stabilized. Whatever you did worked perfectly. We're clear to continue to Los Angeles. Excellent work, both of you. Excellent work, both of you. Remington said, settling back into the captain's chair. He glanced at Aurora. Would you like to return to the cabin or stay up here with us? You've more than earned your place in that jump seat. Aurora considered the question. In the cabin, she would face a mixture of newfound respect and lingering awkwardness. Here in the cockpit, she felt a sense of purpose and belonging she hadn't experienced since before Damascus. "I'll stay," she decided, "if you don't mind the company." "I owe you my life," Remington replied quietly. "You can have my seat if you want it." As the plane continued through the storm front, occasional turbulence jostled the aircraft, but with the electrical systems now functioning normally, the mood in the cockpit was calm and focused. "You know," Remington said after a period of comfortable silence, "there's an opening for a safety consultant in our Seattle office. Someone to train flight crews on emergency protocols. The position requires extensive medical knowledge and crisis management experience." Aurora raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering me a job, Captain Vale?" "I'm suggesting you'd be perfect for it," he replied. "The world needs your expertise, Dr. Blackthorne, not hidden away in research labs, but out here where it makes a difference." Through the cockpit window, they could see they were emerging from the storm. Sunlight broke through the clouds ahead, illuminating their path forward. "Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition?" Aurora said as they adjusted course, but deserved it more than anyone else. "Yes," Remington replied, glancing at her. "I'm looking at her right now." Aurora smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her scarred features. "I meant you, actually. Taking what happened to you and using it to protect others, without anyone knowing what you endured. Maybe that's what survival really means," Remington reflected. "Not just living through something terrible, but finding purpose in it afterward." The plane banked gently, beginning its journey across the final stretch of ocean, leaving the storm behind. Below them, the Pacific stretched vast and blue, while above, clear skies promised smooth flying ahead. "Sometimes," Aurora said, watching the clouds disperse beneath them, "we end up exactly where we belong, even when the journey there leaves scars." Kingsley glanced at his watch. 2 hours to Los Angeles, if anyone's counting. "I stopped counting time a long time ago," Aurora replied. "Started measuring it in moments that matter instead." In the cabin behind them, passengers had settled back into their routines, the brief crisis already becoming an anecdote they would share upon landing. Yet something fundamental had shifted in how they viewed each other and themselves. The woman they had judged and rejected for her appearance had proven to be their salvation. The scars they had recoiled from were evidence not of something broken, but of extraordinary courage. And perhaps in that realization, each passenger found themselves examining their own invisible scars, their own untold stories of survival, as Transcontinental Flight 447 began its descent toward Los Angeles International Airport. The late afternoon sun painted the California coastline in shades of gold and amber. Aurora watched through the cockpit window as the sprawling city came into view, its geometric patterns of streets and buildings stretching toward distant mountains. "LAX approach control, this is Transcontinental 447, Remington spoke into his headset. "Request vectors for runway 24 left. Transcontinental 447 LAX approach. You're cleared for the visual approach to runway 24 left. Welcome to Los Angeles." Aurora found herself thinking about the journey, not just the physical one from New York, but the emotional distance she had traveled in the span of 6 hours. When she had boarded this morning, she had been a woman defined by her scars, relegated to the back of the plane, invisible and unwanted. Now, she sat in the cockpit of a commercial airliner, consulted as an expert, recognized for her true worth. Beginning final approach, Kingsley announced, his hands steady on the controls as Remington supervised the descent. Through the passenger intercom, they could hear the flight attendants preparing the cabin for landing. Aurora imagined the passengers below, many of whom had witnessed her transformation from pariah to hero. Some would carry the memory of this flight with them, perhaps thinking twice the next time they encountered someone who looked different. "Gear down, flaps set," Remington called out, following the landing checklist with practiced precision. All systems green. Aurora watched the runway approach, remembering her first flight as a young medical officer, full of dreams and determination. That woman seemed like a stranger now, unmarked by trauma, untempered by loss, innocent of the cruel realities that war could bring. Yet perhaps this scarred version of herself was somehow more complete, more authentic. Beautiful landing, Aurora observed as the wheels touched down smoothly and the aircraft decelerated along the runway. "Thank you," Kingsley replied with a smile, "though I had some pretty exceptional company in the cockpit today." As they taxied toward the gate, Remington turned to Aurora. "So, about that position in Seattle. The salary is competitive, the work is meaningful, and you'd be training the next generation of aviation professionals. Plus, you'd be working closely with our safety department." Aurora considered the offer. After years of hiding in research facilities and avoiding public attention, the idea of returning to active service was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "It's been a long time since I considered stepping back into the world. The world needs you in it." Remington said simply, not hidden away, but front and center, making a difference. The aircraft came to a stop at the gate, and the familiar sounds of shutdown procedures filled the cockpit. Aurora gathered her belongings, including the notebook that had started so many conversations today. "Ladies and gentlemen," Remington announced over the intercom, "welcome to Los Angeles. Local time is 4:47 p.m. and the temperature is a pleasant 72 degrees. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you for flying with Transcontinental Airways." He paused, then added, "I'd also like to thank Dr. Aurora Blackthorne for reminding us all that true heroism often goes unrecognized, and that the most extraordinary people among us sometimes bear visible scars of invisible courage. Safe travels, everyone." As the passengers began to disembark, Aurora made her way through the cabin one final time. The atmosphere was markedly different from the boarding process that morning. Passengers stood as she passed, offering nods of respect and quiet words of gratitude. Sergeant Hawthorne approached her near the exit. "Dr. Blackthorne, I wanted to give you this." He handed her a military challenge coin. "It belonged to my squad leader, the one you saved in Damascus. He asked me to give it to you if I ever had the chance." Aurora accepted the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. "Thank you. This means more than you know." The Montgomerys waited near the jetway, their expensive luggage arranged around them like a fortress. As Aurora approached, they both stood awkwardly. "Dr. Blackthorne?" Scarlett began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about what you said about seeing people differently. I've never been challenged to examine my own prejudices before." Knox nodded, his usual confidence replaced by genuine humility. "We've donated to veterans organizations for years, but I realize now we never really understood what service and sacrifice actually mean. We'd like to make a contribution to the Damascus Memorial Fund in your honor, if you'll allow it." Aurora studied them for a moment, seeing past their designer clothes and jewelry to something more vulnerable underneath. "I appreciate the gesture, but I'd prefer you make that donation in honor of those who didn't come home. And perhaps, next time you encounter someone who looks different, you'll remember this flight." "We will," Scarlett promised, tears in her eyes. "I swear to you, we will." As Aurora finally stepped off the aircraft, she found Nova waiting for her with a bouquet of flowers from the crew. "These are from all of us," Nova said, "and I wanted you to know. I'm applying for medical school next semester. Your example gave me the courage to pursue my dreams." Aurora accepted the flowers, touched by the gesture. "You'll make an excellent doctor. Never forget that healing isn't just about medical knowledge. It's about seeing the whole person, scars and all." In the terminal, Aurora paused to look back at the aircraft that had carried her through such an unexpected journey. Captain Remington Vale appeared beside her, having completed his post-flight duties. "So," he said, "have you given any more thought to that position in Seattle?" Aurora smiled, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years, hope for the future. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time for the Phoenix of Damascus to rise again." 6 months later, Dr. Aurora Blackthorne stood in a training facility at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, addressing a room full of pilots and flight attendants. Her scars were visible, uncovered, no longer a source of shame but a testament to survival and service. "Today we're going to discuss crisis management protocols," she began, her voice strong and confident. "But first, I want you to understand something fundamental in an emergency. You never know who among your passengers might be your greatest asset. The person you least expect might be exactly who you need. She gestured to a chart showing various emergency scenarios. Let me tell you about a flight I took recently, where assumptions nearly prevented the right people from being in the right place at the right time. In the back of the room, Captain Remington Vale watched with pride as his former savior began training the next generation of aviation professionals. The woman who had once been hidden away in the back of his aircraft now commanded respect and attention, her expertise valued above all else. Outside the training facility windows, aircraft took off and landed in endless succession, each one carrying passengers with their own stories, their own scars, their own hidden strengths. And somewhere among them, Aurora knew, were heroes waiting to be recognized, phoenixes waiting to rise from their own ashes. The transformation was complete. Dr. Aurora Blackthorn had found her place in the world once again, not despite her scars, but because of everything they represented. She had learned that sometimes the journey back to oneself begins with a single flight, a moment of recognition, and the courage to rise above the expectations of others. As she continued her presentation, her voice filled with passion and purpose, Aurora realized that this was where she belonged. Not hidden in the shadows of her past, but standing in the light of her expertise, training others to see beyond the surface to the extraordinary potential that exists in every human being. The Phoenix Protocol, as it came to be known, became standard training for airlines worldwide, the principle that heroes often come in unexpected forms, that judgment based on appearance can blind us to incredible capability, and that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, scars and all. And in airports around the world, passengers boarded aircraft with a little more awareness, a little more compassion, knowing that the person sitting next to them, no matter how different they might appear, could be exactly the hero they never knew they needed.